Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I've said on this platform several times that Zimbabwe is a failed state. I've had some response on the social media where some people have been asking what is a failed state. And some even going to the extent of saying Zimbabwe is not a failed state. Well, Zimbabwe is a failed state. Here is the Wikipedia definition of a failed state. I think any honest Zimbabwean out there will have to admit that many of these things apply to Zimbabwe. I'll just pick a few of them. Zimbabwe is incapable of collecting tax. This cannot be disputed. In 2012, the late Edward Shindori Shininga, he was the chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Mining. He visited Chiadzwa and Marange diamonds and came back with a report that said the mining there of the diamonds, there was no record of the quality and quantity of diamonds they were extracting. There was no record of to whom they sold the diamonds and for how much. There was no record of who the beneficiaries of the proceeds were. Those involved in the mining of the diamonds had a special concession license, mining concession, that waived all the rules which would otherwise require them to keep a record of all those things. Of course, the explanation for it was simple enough. The beneficiaries did not have to declare how much they earned, and so they didn't have to pay tax. That has become the template of Zimbabwe's corruption. These special concession licenses, or as I would want to call it, the license to loot, has been applied across the board. In 2023, the Al Jazeera documentary gave details of how Zimbabwe is gold mining worth $2 billion per annum. 80% of that gold was being smuggled out of the country. When it's smuggled, no one keeps any record. We're going back to Chiadzwa special concessions. No one paid taxes. And if you are incapable of collecting taxes, the other things follow. the failure to maintain infrastructure, to provide basic services as education and health care for the ordinary citizens. The wealth of the country is now to the benefit of the few with the right connections. This is what has become of Zimbabwe. Here is a clip of Professor Jonathan Moyo talking on the issue of the looting of the diamonds.
Are you corrupt?
No, in fact, this is laughable. Seriously laughable. First of all, this is an accusation coming from the most corrupt politicians and public officials in the history of our country. They cannot account for the assets that they have. The richest individual in the Republic of Zimbabwe is Emmerson Mnangagwa, the one person who was responsible for setting up ZANU-PF companies when he was the Secretary for Finance of the ruling party is Emmerson Mnangagwa. There is no cent that comes from those companies, including a bank, including investments in the region, in countries like Namibia and even South Africa. The person who led the plunder of resources, even in foreign countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, leading to the United Nations investigating and coming up with a report that is still there, is Emmerson Mnangagwa, along with the military cabal of General Chiwenga, SP Moyo, the person who brought the Chinese to plunder Chiadzwa diamond resources for Zimbabwe, up to a point where we have, at the very least, over a period from 2007 to 2014, some 12 to 15 billion dollars in diamond revenue that remains unaccounted for, that went into the pockets of individuals. These people have staged a coup, not just to grab power for the sake of grabbing power, but in order to cover up their corruption. That command agriculture was nothing but a looting scheme.
As I said, incapable of collecting taxes is at the heart of the economy. Corruption is at the heart of the economy. And the consequences of that is the failure to provide basic services. One of the things listed there in Wikipedia is the appearance of refugees and involuntary movement of populations. I think we know that is Zimbabwe. Millions of Zimbabweans have left the country, many of them to South Africa and other countries in the region, and many others beyond SADC. Zimbabweans have been scattered like leaves in autumn all over the globe as economic and or political refugees. The other point I would like to mention there is the lawlessness, the political instability. This has been one of Zimbabwe's biggest problems. One of the obvious notable things about the lawlessness and lack of security of the person is the fact that ever since the country's independence in 1980, a staggering 40,000 people have been murdered by the regime for political reasons. From the Kukura-Hundi, from all the political turmoil that has always been part and parcel of Zimbabwe, especially during elections. Zimbabwe has never been at peace. And those behind the lawlessness are those in government, in positions of power and authority. Here is another video clip of Professor Ibo Mandaza talking about the lawlessness, the turmoil that followed the 2008 electoral coup.
I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat on 2008. He phoned Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, look, I lost the election and I concede defeat. And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns, was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, you stay where you are. And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. I don't know. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away, no? That's why, yeah. And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat its people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all here in South Africa as to the brutality of the regime in Harare. So it amazes me, it angers me, in fact, when I hear the nonsense coming out of people like Mbalula's mouth. They know it. And the report has never been published, the general's report, to this day. That tells you. Is it complicit behavior? I don't know. But to get back to 2008, the runoff took place. Mugabe was sworn in at midnight before boarding a plane with Mbeki to Sharm el-Sheikh. Ambassador, I forgot to mention that. Yes? I won't talk about it was contrived, but clearly there was a definite plan to keep Mugabe in office. And it's no secret that I had Thabo speaking the other day saying the Zimbabwean people came together to form the GNU. It's only half true. Morgan Tsvangirai was literally regimented into the GNU. That's a fact.
So that is the tragic reality of Zimbabwe. We are a failed state because of the lawlessness. And one of the key laws that we failed to uphold is how to govern ourselves. This has been at the heart of our problem. 45 years after independence, we still have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Sad, tragic. And that failure has meant we've been stuck with a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical regime. The nation made a concerted effort to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship in the late 1990s. The MDC was formed to answer the nation's calls for democratic changes. Changes to restore the fundamental rights of all the individuals to a meaningful say in the governance of the country, free, fair elections. The restoration of the rule of law, where the government, whoever is to form a government, must be elected by the people in a free, fair, and credible election process. This has been our greatest failure as a people. It must be said, the MDC, CCC have had many opportunities to implement those democratic reforms, but failed. They've been on the political stage for the last 25 years, including the 5 years in the 2008 to 2013 GNU. And still they failed to implement even one reform. We're still, ever since the GNU debacle, the MDC CCC leaders have participated in flawed elections out of greed. They knew ZANU-PF was rigging the elections. They knew participating in those flawed elections will only give ZANU-PF legitimacy. But they participated regardless, out of greed. And what has made our situation worse is that the people themselves have failed to realize that the MDC CCC leaders were now ZANU-PF Team B in all but name, participating in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF victory and to give the regime legitimacy. This is a problem of our own making. We cannot deny that we had many opportunities to end it and we wasted them. I'll just play end with playing a video where Mnangagwa is denouncing the regional friends. SADC and the AU were the election observers in 2023, and they both condemned the election process because it was flawed and illegal. And instead of Mnangagwa paying attention, he dismissed those reports with the usual contempt.
Vana vakatuka ZANU-PF kana ini ndonyanyisa kufara kuita zvakanaka. Ukavona vavengi vako vachikurumbidza nekuchikanganisa, ukavona vachiti ZANU-PF yakaipa, farai. You are doing great things for your country. Hongu takaita maelections edu kuna vamwe vaitaura zvisina musoro zvikanzi maelections anafamba zvakanaka ndezvavo.
The people of Zimbabwe have got to ask themselves, this is the man who was at the heart of the electoral coup in 2008, who executed Operation Mafutera Papi that caused so much death and suffering and subverted the right of the people to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. He and his friend Chwenga, how is it possible that they have occupied the highest offices in the land? These two individuals should have gone to jail. And yet, they occupy the highest offices in the land. Are we surprised that they went on to carry out the military coup of 2017 and have been rigging elections and have continued to rig elections, rather, post that military coup? Right now, Zimbabwe is facing the reality that although Mnangagwa rigged the 2023 elections, and they were condemned by both SADC and the AU, as we heard him in that video, he's dismissing those condemnations with contempt. And right now, he and his cronies are orchestrating a move to have the 2028 elections postponed under the pretext that he is doing so well. He must be allowed to stay in power until 2030. The right of the people of Zimbabwe to a meaningful say in the governance of the country is not negotiable. It doesn't say that right can be suspended if the person in power is doing well. By whose standard? Who said so? The people must have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. And that has been lacking in Zimbabwe. And that is what we need in Zimbabwe. There is no escaping. We are a failed state. What must we do to become a healthy, functioning, and thriving state. Reverse all the above. We must stamp out corruption. There should be no such thing as this special concession mining licenses where people loot and they don't even pay tax. There should be no such thing as certain individuals who have got the divine right to rule the country. Those are the fundamental rules. The government, whoever is in government, must be elected by the people in a free, fair, and credible election. That is not negotiable. Those are the things we must insist on and demand. The people themselves must wake up to the reality that they've been easily conned to believe some of the idiotic nonsense, such as that the opposition can win rigged elections. After 45 years of rigged elections, we want to believe that we can win rigged elections. Why would you give up your right, your fundamental right to free, fair, and credible elections? Because somebody told you can win rigged elections? If Zimbabwe fail to deny ZANU-PF legitimacy in 2028, the dictatorship will continue. The nation will continue to sink even deeper into the abyss. Zimbabwe is the world's textbook case of failed state. There's nothing to be proud of there. We can end it if we want to. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.